So 5 years ago, any content I made of this sort would have gotten immediately deleted from this platform. So we're going to try again and see if it means anything, because now I can back it up with peer-reviewed research and personal anecdotes. So I'm going to put at the bottom of this video the link to the scientific article published in October of this year in a valid peer-reviewed journal that basically says that they overestimated through the PCR testing how many people were actually infected with SARS-CoV2 infections, or COVID-19 infection rates were over-exaggerated, which is probably why we didn't have the pandemic levels of death like they predicted that we would have. So I've seen this before. I worked for a clinical research laboratory in the R&D division between my bachelor's degree and grad school. I won't mention any of that because I don't want to drag them into this, but one of my responsibilities was to validate PCR diagnostic tests for the determination of declaring infections or declaring the state of disease in patients. So one of the projects that I worked on under my French boss was to develop these all PCR-based tests to identify with a 95% confidence level that a person who came in for this test actually had the disease or the condition that they were designed to test. So I would my boss would come up with the protocols. I would take them into the lab and I would test them and validate them in double blind, and triple blind. And every sample had to be tested at least 27 times, and 26 out of 27 times it had to give the exact same result, or we'd throw it out. And I can't remember all the details because it's been a long time now, but I do remember going to her office and saying, this is not consistent enough. What do you want me to do? And she said, throw it out. And I was just flabbergasted because I spent $50,000 a week on all the projects that I was working on in materials and supplies. So to be working on this for like 3 weeks, and let's say it was $5,000 a week, and just pitch it, that was a lot of money. And I wasn't even making $50,000 a year. I was making $36,000 a year, but I was spending more in a week in materials than I guess it was probably a month. And I was spending $50,000 a month. That's what it was. So I was spending more in a month than I made in a year in the materials that I would use. And that was just the cost of business. They didn't have any problem with it because I was pretty good. And if you want, I can give you links to the publications that came out of that, because I'm not listed as an author, but I am listed in the acknowledgments. But those are my first publications, actually. So I did these tests. They would throw them out, and I know full well that you have to choose the right location in order to have a valid PCR-based test. Because if they're not specific enough, then you'll get false positives and false negatives. And it sounds like that's what was happening here, is they picked something that worked and then just ran with it. And because it's a short strand of DNA nucleotides that's probably too short and too non-specific, it occurs with enough regularity that it was no longer a valid marker for whether or not the disease was there. Now, you've seen these kinds of things in any of these TV shows you've watched about crime, where they take a sample of blood or human fluid and then put it in a bunch of tests and compare it to suspected perpetrators or suspects, or they're trying to identify an unknown person and they're comparing it to DNA from missing persons. And so those are markers that they have identified through lots of trial and error over the years as valid measurements of whether or not those places are valid to use as places of comparison. In other words, they're not hypervariable enough to be markers, but they're not hypervariable enough to be repeated ad infinitum through the genome and give you false positives in places that they're not. So that's what they do. They take it, they cut it up, or they amplify pieces of it, and so either they're doing a restriction fragment length polymorphism or a polymerase chain reaction on a marker, and they're either finding places where it cuts, or they're amplifying places where a specific strain of nucleotides is found. And that technology took years to develop, and there are older cases that are still being found invalid because now that they have updated markers, they're able to prove that the person who was convicted didn't do it because the markers they were using were wrong. And that's what we have here. We have a group of German researchers who went through the antibody tests that were done and found that there's only probably about, hold on, I'm going to check the article. they found that only 14% of those who came back as positive were actually carrying the disease. There's many reasons for this. It's an RNA-based virus, RNA fragments all the time. It's possible to have pieces of it without having the whole thing, and therefore, if you have the right piece, you would get a false positive, and therefore they would consider that an infected individual. So and so it questions the validity of their choice of the target, and that's what I'm looking at here. Is so they made us go through all this expense, they made us go through all this hassle. And then the research now that we have 5 years later shows that they were wrong about pretty much everything, and that they were wrong because they chose something that was easy instead of something that was right. This is a common thing in junk science, is that they will go after something that is easy rather than something that is the correct choice. They will go looking for something that validates the conclusion that they want, and not look for what the evidence says and draw conclusions based on what the evidence actually is that they collect. It's sort of like when a law enforcement officer finds a suspect and they go trying to prove that person is the one, rather than looking at who the amalgamation of evidence says is the most likely candidate. They have one individual and they, with blinders on, go after that person. And that's, I think, what happened here is they found something, and with blinders on, nope, this is what we're using. It works, and it does work. But in Germany, only 14% of those that tested positive actually had it, according to the serological results presented in this paper, which you may not be able to read because you don't have a subscription, and I don't know if it's behind the paywall at PubMed either. So I'll give you the PubMed link as well, so that if it's there, you can find it. That doesn't mean I'll understand it. I understand it because when I got this job, ironically, one of the things they asked me in my job interview is what my experience was with PCR. We don't do a ton of it here, and now that I'm in chemistry, I don't do any. But I do have a fair amount of experience, and it's well documented. I think I even brought the papers and showed them. Yeah, these are me. When I was before I had a graduate degree, I was very well versed at this. And that's not to say that I'm an expert. It just means that when I have questions, they're valid because I have experience doing this. I've seen the potential pitfalls and the ways in which people have decided to overcome them. Because basically what my boss would do is go back and retool it and find a different place. Then we'd go attack that until we got to the 95% confidence level. Because nothing sucks worse than being a patient, going in, having a test done, and they tell you have a disease you don't actually have. Because there's the emotional cost and then the financial cost that is borne by that in treating something that doesn't actually have to be treated in the first place. Now, this is the non-scientific part of the video. I think this is because they wanted it to be a new Spanish flu. They really wanted this to be a global pandemic. And I know I'm not going to speculate as to why, because the rationale for why may be as variable as the markers they were using to test for it could be. But I think they wanted this to be a thing because people like periodicity. They like to measure things with repeatable units. Christmas is every year on the same day. Your birthday is every year on the same day, whatever your birthday is. And it's been about 100 years since we had a global pandemic out of this same family of viruses. And when they do happen, they're really bad. They really wanted this because people wanted to matter. They wanted to be involved in it. They wanted to find a cure, find an answer, find information. They wanted to be in the forefront of this. They wanted to get published. They wanted to be remembered. Because let's face it, most of us are not going to be remembered very long after we die. I probably won't be remembered very long after I die, and it's okay because it is what it is. I'm not the kind of person who's going to do stuff to likely make him remembered long after he's gone. But people want their lives to matter, and so it's an understandably human characteristic that they wanted it to be that, so they could be a part of correcting it, saving lives, and being a part of the solution rather than just part of the problem. Instead, in their overzealous desire to be renowned, they became part of the problem. And these are the kinds of things that made it a problem. Because, like I tell my students, the people that you treat as patients are going to make life-altering decisions based on the information that you give them. And if the information you give them is wrong, they're going to alter their lives in ways that are wrong. And hopefully it won't hurt them, but it might. During the pandemic, we were fed information that was wrong. People made life-altering decisions, and governments made life-altering decisions that turned out to be wrong. They cost people lives. They cost people other alternatives. And so our lives were permanently changed from what they could have been to what they are because somebody read too much into a scientific test. Now, I can't remember where I heard this. It was probably in Immunology 460 when I was learning about PCR for the first time from, I think his name was Howard, Professor Howard, visiting professor from Harvard, who told me that it does not tell you what they want you to think it does. It is just a tool. It is one of many tools. And if you don't use all the tools to independently corroborate your claim, you're going to jump to conclusions. And now here we are, what's that, 25 years later, jumping to conclusions based on a test that was never designed to have this kind of weight put upon it in terms of the decisions that we make. So I'll tell you the same thing I tell all my classes every semester. Scientists are people too, and we make mistakes. Some of us are for sale, and some of us are already sold out. And so you have to follow the money. And if you can't follow the money, then follow the women, because the women will chase the money. And if you can figure out where the money is going, then you can figure out who the real rationale behind it. And so now that we look at all the money that is spent, I think people wanted this to be. I won't speculate as to why. I'll let other people speculate as to that. But I think they wanted this to be a pandemic, so they found a way to prove that it was. And now we're finding out that they were wrong, and all those videos that I had removed should never have been removed. The videos that were removed from here, the posts I put on what's now X, that shouldn't have been deleted, because I didn't put up stuff without corroboration like this, and I asked questions. I didn't cast aspersions. What about this? What's going on with that? And because I didn't have the right credentials, because they don't ask for your credentials when you make a channel here, and it's not like sitting in this office. I mean, who the hell has a Spec 20 in their office and a big stack of gloves? This is the laptop storage. What else I have in this room that looks scientific? I've got my ethanol to clean stuff off. There's not a ton of scientific stuff that you can see from there, but you can see this that says caution, chemical storage area. That's the prep area. And on this wall right here, through this wall, is the hazardous material storage. So I don't know what other credentials I need. I don't have any on my wall. But do your own homework. It's always good advice. Anyway, Godspeed. May you live long and prosper. And may the information that you get be as correct and as useful as possible. Because everything I would have done differently in my life is because the information was either inaccurate or incomplete. And so I want you to have the best information you can so you can make the best decisions possible. And then you can have the best lives you can have, whoever you are, wherever you are, and even if you disagree with me. Because our lives at the end of the day are about helping other people live better lives than we did. And if you didn't do that, I think you failed at life. Anyway, Godspeed. Take care.